Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak to you here on the GCP renovation. My name is Dr. Ho Kim Pietsch. I'm currently seconded as a national expert to the European Medicines Agency in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and I have been a GCP inspector at the Paul-Ehrlich Institute for many years, and I also had the pleasure to support the regulatory chairs of the ICH E6 expert working group on this. Again, thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to speak about the new GCP, the R3, and then the topic which was suggested to me is like here, put it in context and addressing gaps and enhancing global clinical practice. So here's my usual disclaimer. So with all presentations, so the views expressed in this presentation are the personal views of the authors and may not be understood or quoted as being made on behalf of or reflecting the position of the European Medicines Agency or one of its committees or working parties or of the Paul-Ehrlich Institute. Having said this is a very high-level outline, what I intend to talk to you about the next half hour. And so first, let's have a look at the renovation of the guideline, which reached step 4 recently, and then talking about the implementation. And this is, I think, and I hope to cover the requested points by the organizers. So for those who have not been too familiar with this, I'm giving a short background on this. For those who have been following closer to the GCP innovation, I do apologize, but I felt like to provide full context, I'll spend a minute explaining briefly what good clinical practice is. So GCP is a standard for the planning, initiating, performing, recording, oversight, evaluation, analysis, and reporting of clinical trials that provides assurance that the data and reported results are reliable and the rights, safety, and well-being of trial participants are protected. I know it's a long sentence, but it grasps the essential and the spirits on what GCP is about. You're also aware that ICH E6 is a globally accepted standards, and adhering to this is a requirement in the European Union, where it has been in effect since 1996. There has been a revision in 2016, which was an addendum to the original version. And then what I'm going to cover today is the first full rewrite, which finalized in 2025 earlier this year. But all of this, it's always worth to mention that the patients has always been at the forefront of this guideline. And from the previous statement here, it's also, I'm not going to repeat, that so briefly mention again, it's really when thinking about all of this, also tailoring, improving GCP, always that this should be kept in mind, and that the right safety and well-beings of the participants are the most important considerations and should prevail over interests of science and society. Part of this is the informed consent as an integral feature, and I will also touch on one or two aspects later during my presentation. And then here's on the ethical conduct, as it's not only about the data. And it's also one point which was taken up and further elaborating in this revision, to stress further that participants are free to withdraw at any time from a clinical trial. And further specifics are described in the guideline. It also sets high standards for the qualification of clinical staff conducting clinical trials to oversight by the sponsor or sponsors and systems to ensure ongoing safety of participation in the trial. Also, what triggered or what was taken into account in this rewrite. So major concerns have been raised by academic stakeholders, but also by all other interested parties on this, which were also then taken into due account, but then by the appointed ICH expert working group. So here I'm trying to summarize some of the major concerns raised. It was one criticism was on R2 that it encouraged or it was interpreted as a one-size-fits-all approach, which won't or didn't do justice to the evolving and diverse clinical trial ecosystem. Another concern was that it was overinterpreted and rigid application of this guideline. And here it was not only then the meant or directed by the regulators, where I'm part of this, but it's also that it was also clearly stated that this was also done by the industry and other stakeholders in the clinical trial ecosystem. Along with this, it was also felt that it was not flexible enough to allow for new technologies and trial designs, including lower risk trials and data sources. And here, if you recall the previous slides, the original version was finalized in 1996, and those who had been around, I was a teenager at this time, things looked slightly or dramatically different as they look today. And also one of the aim was to make this rewrite future-proof. And the last one I would like to highlight here that, it was a concern raised that there was an over-focus on generation and retention of documentation and unachievable perfect data. For those who were following previous events organized by Connect, I think I had last year so like a quote on perfect data or perfect trials, which is not something that should be desirable. Then on this slide, I'm also giving you some hyperlinked and also references, as obviously in the 30, 40 minutes, I cannot cover everything and every detail of the ICH E6R3. And for further information, it's also when step 4, when the document was finalized and adopted by the ICH Assembly, the expert working group also developed a very well-informed and balanced and informative step 4 presentation. So to those who didn't have a chance to look into this, I think I can strongly recommend to have a look at this presentation as well. So speaking a little bit about technicalities and then also on the implementation. So step 4, in accordance with the ICH SOP, this is then the adoption of the guideline. But then the step 5 is the actual implementation, which is then up to the national regional procedures. And here I would like to point that in the EU, so we gave stakeholders a 6 months transition time. So as this presentation will be streamed on the 15th July, which will be then just 1 week before then R3 comes into effect in the European Union. So, and then going back, and I already raised some points, as part of the renovation, but I think it's really important, that it's like really the feedback, especially also from investigators and sponsors, were taken into account and reflected and discussed in the expert working group meetings. And also here, as the patients are at the forefront of this, so there were also the patients' input, taking up and taking on board on the final document and the development process. And here, those words, you will see throughout the presentation, but also throughout the document. It's like on the proportionality, that embracing the risk-based approach, which was also introduced in R2, but it was felt that it was not fully embraced, or people were cautious to take this up or say, okay, we better do everything instead of being sorry, and also stressing again here how, looking at, how can we improve gaps or enhance, it's like focusing or refocusing, on a good trial design to do things early on and building quality up in front instead of trying to fix something in the middle or even after the trial has ended. And we also, or the expert working group, so did their efforts to position the guideline so it embraces and is ready for new novel technologies and trial types now and what can be foreseen in the future. And also one thing which has been highlighted in the step 4 presentations and other news, it's really now with, with the data governance involvement. So there's a new complete data governance section in this rewrite as well. And here, again, on one slide, keywords, if you would have, or if you're asking, what are main changes, in few words, few terms, I think it's here really, it's like, it's like a refocus or focusing on the principles, the structure has changed of the document as well, and then concepts which run throughout the whole guideline, then including the appendix and the annex. It's also here then clarifying, on the responsibilities and oversight by the investigator and sponsors. We added clarification to the informed consent process. And as I already said, there's a complete new section on the data governance. And also a major change is on the essential records for the conduct of clinical trials, which used to be the section 8 in ICH 6R3 on the essential documents, where also a lot of comments were received early on, but also then during the public consultation phase, which led also to significant changes from the version which was put up for public consultation and then the final version adopted. So, and here, so I briefly already mentioned, there's now the standalone section on principles, on the structure, and then there's the Annex 1, which provides further details. And Annex 2, and you hopefully had heard about this, and Annex 2 is still under developing drafting. The public consultation period ended in all regions in spring earlier this year roundabout, if I'm not mistaken, when this is, focusing on alternative trial types and data sources as well. And then it's really here, it's like focus, because its trials are getting more complex. So it's like really, instead of trying to do trying to do everything perfect, over engineers, like focus, on proportionalities and embracing the risk-based approach and a thoughtful trial design. So some more changes, just, without digging further into the data governance section, there's like obviously, something which was also called, much more information guidance giving, on computerized systems management, validation, as they play a bigger and bigger role in the clinical trial ecosystem. We also clarified the scope and the application of the guideline, as also various comments were received and requests to clarify this in the R3, which the expert working group did eventually. And here it's also, after mentioning computerized systems and data governance, it's also something what the group embraced, to make and embrace also media neutrality throughout the document. Of course, then this always has to be in line with local regulatory requirements and application, but this is something the group took on board, and hopefully you see this throughout the document and make people consider and weigh the media and the right media to use, accordingly in the clinical trial design and conduct. And it's also here really in the guideline to encourage greater engagement with the community and stakeholders and on the transparency. Here on the patient centricity and transparency, it's like on the trial designs, but it's also, the use of decentralized elements, which really, got a boost during the last pandemic, and they have been used before, but I think this have accelerated or put those use, more at the forefront also on sponsors and stakeholders thinking how to use this. And as think that the rewrite also provides more guidance on the use of decentralized elements were considered useful and appropriate. And here on the consent topic, as alluded earlier, it's like really, there has been like feedback concerns that the informed consent process and forms, came like too large, too big the forms for covering 80 pages or so, just a whole process. They're trying to make really everything legally sure, which has its right and place, but also with focusing, that the process should fit its purpose and be concise, also involving, the trial participants or the potential trial participants, and also use and explore the use of alternative methods, where appropriate, here it's like with electronic methods available on there, of course, again, in line with regulatory requirements and practices. And it's also balancing the reconsent, which was also a concern and input received during the process, when information is available, and then it comes with a lot of burden process, and that sponsors and stakeholders should think, when reconsent is actually needed and warranted or not. This all again, then it's like building into this overarching concepts. And also E6 should not read alone in isolation. And it's also mentioned in the introduction of the guideline. Read it in conjunction with other relevant ICH guidelines and other relevant guidelines out and there. Here in quality by design, it's really, doing this prospective, it's also on identify and manage. And I think that's also important because we've seen, when sponsors start, okay, I identify those critical to quality factors, that's so good, but the job is not done, Also, you need to manage those, and also, the associated relevant risks, throughout the trial design. It's also then saying, okay, don't do everything, 110%, focus, but then this requires, and this is also where we want to encourage the critical thinking by the stakeholders in there, and this should then also lead to minimize unnecessary complexity and also reduce the burden on the trial participants and investigators as well. So, and these are like all interconnected concepts. he is speaking about investigators. So one thing which has been noticed, that the term investigator supervision has been replaced with oversight. And here we want to convey the message, that the oversight level should be proportionate to the importance of the data and the risk to patient safety and data reliability. Because also with the different trial settings design, from the investigator, they wonder, okay, what is needed? Do I need to watch all of my stuff all over the shoulder all of the time, regardless what they're doing? I think you get the idea what the likely answer to this rhetorical question may be. And also another area where we got the input that we need to boost and provide further guidance, on investigator oversight of contracted service providers, which we are seeing in some regions more and more. And then here it was clarified that the investigator retains ultimate responsibility for persons or service providers to which they delegate activities. And here it's again concept of proportionality. In here, then it's like on the delegated activity and the importance of data collected and risk to the trial participant safety and data reliability. And there are also settings in some regions, so when the service provider is contracted by the sponsor on behalf of the investigator. And here again, home nurses are not used in all regions, but this is just one example, then here, like then in this case, the investigator could have the appropriate oversight of this person. And then here one way to achieve this is that the sponsor should provide sufficient information to allow the investigator to evaluate the suitability of this person for undertaking this delegated task. And I believe this adds good clarity and guidance on these topics. Here, just two more very briefly, then in relation to the IP management, that they're responsible, but then, there may could be like adjusted procedures, for example, for products with limited safety data, and also where the sections have been rewritten, on the unblinding procedures and the importance how to keep the blinds procedures, and here on the investigator, that they should be able to perform the unblinding in case of emergencies to protect the participant safety. So this is again, it's very important, that this is built into and enabled in clinical trials here. And here on the safety reportings, here it was also clarified, that AEs and or abnormal test results should be reported to the sponsor according to the reporting requirements and within specified protocol timelines. And here it's like also then linking to one of the key themes, going back, the protocol is important, take the efforts, make sure, that you do have a sound protocol upfront and amend it, as needed, and review it, including the associated documents. The word on the informed consent here again, the proportionality, is highlighted again, avoid unnecessarily complexity and greater clarity so they can give, and it also helps the investigator or person, to provide and guide through the process, but this will also be appreciated then by the potential or actual trial participants. And here's like really, this flexibility in the options, based on the trial and the population. And it's really, like this has been like a call from patient organizations, it's like, clear and simple language, that's an essential part of this. And so they can also then raise any questions throughout the process. this brings me then to the next topic on the sponsor oversight. Here, the guideline, calls for a focus on the critical to quality factors and the associated risks. You cannot always eliminate all risks, but, like then, once you have identified, manage those, and then also do this, please, throughout the course of the trial. Again, also with the different trial type settings, it's also, it's called, not to place unnecessary burden on the participants and the investigators and the staff, and here it's also, that the sponsor should ensure, the clear role, tasks, responsibility, and then there should be appropriate agreements in place, where necessary to document this. And here again, from then, it's like clarity in the trial design, really define the research question or questions, and then, collecting data which are deemed to be essential to answer the questions and adhere really to the principle of quality by design. Monitoring is still like a big section in R3, and then here it's with the monitoring strategy. There are different models, and among this, and then the strategy should factor the trial scope, design, blinding, safety profile, and endpoints. All in this, and along then with the potential to impact participants' rights, safety, and well-being. And of course, sponsors are responsible to ensure data integrity. And here it's like a few topics or areas highlighted again around randomization and blinding. And here it's also, I'll come to the essential records later, but here's also, which takes a moment, it's like really stress, timely and clear documentation is encouraged. Mandated, including then, in clinical trial reports, and do this in a timely manner. So as this can support the oversight activities by the sponsor. Already mentioned the risk-based approach, so for the sake of time, I'll stop short on this slide here to summarize, and also then taking this one higher level back, it's like really on the implementation of this risk appropriate approach. It's like you want to assess the element, and if it's necessarily, and really here engaging with the stakeholders, what's practical, what's feasible, do the reality check, and what's essential, and then on the reconsent, if there's, for example, new information becomes available, have a look whether this may only apply to new trial participants or to all who are on the trial, depending on the stage. And here, one slide or two I have on the data governance, which is rich, compact, very informative. It's like really here on, to apply data integrity throughout the whole data life cycle, apply proportionate approaches also to computerized system responsibilities, and also then there's been question, we're using all those systems, do I need to do now all this time, all the whole work efforts for all these systems? And, it's like, here's the expectations, do this like in a risk proportionate manner. And it also provides guidance here to the responsible parties, i.e. investigator sponsors, to maintain data integrity, and here that they cover data protection, computerized system, and essential elements like randomization and blinding. So, validation, but there's like, we could have like a two-work a workshop on validation, so I'm not digging much into this area. One area where we sought to improve or clarify a potential gap or a misconception is about the oversight of the investigator on data integrity, with the increased use of eCIF system here, like the expectation here, instead of having a continuous sign-off for each page, which may not be the best use of the investigator's time, may want to instead focus on key milestones predefined, where the investigator acknowledges the data and also for completeness and accuracy. Similar thoughts and concept hold, on e-tools and, and the patient's perspective, you're seeing more and more patient-reported data tools, computerized electronic as well, and then here it's also, it's consider here from a sponsor perspective, it's also, the return of the engagement of the system, make sure involve them, the technologies will be used, as user-friendly, which also then helps, that you get good data out of this or meaningful data out of it. And here on the timelines, this was also to clarify data reported by the trial participants or investigators. So there was also thought to clarify here that, that corrections could be supported by source data recorded around the time of the event to also recall bias and manipulation of the data. It's like if it's then up then to the scientists, whether you say it like a couple of days, a week or so, may in this setting be reasonable if supported, but then 5 years time, this may be a different scenario. Here, essential records, again, what people perceive like as a big major change, and there has been concerns raised that the previous Section 8 was used as a checklist, which is not what Section 8 was actually saying in reading, but it is what it is. But here, based on this, so we updated here the guidance. Also, we walked away from the word document as it implied, actual document, paper document. So it's records. So also here, media neutrality, and then here it's a new really guidance, what makes record essential, on the content and on the maintenance of those records. And here again, I mentioned critical thinking. Here again, here it's like, do your homework, and determine what you consider is essential, and then needs to be then handled accordingly. Look in the context, what's necessarily for reliable results, maintain the data integrity, and support informed decision-making throughout the trial. So this is now the new Appendix C of R3. So, and there's now only one table, and this guides hopefully a useful tool for those tasks with this. And I'm coming to a close to my presentations here. People have been asking, now it's out, do I need to sit tonight, study, train immediately? My personal take or this, it's not, because when you look at this and when you listen to presentations from experts in the field, you'll recognize that many concepts have already been in place in R2, and as the final version has been published several months ago, you can already start on, hopefully some or most of you have already started to prepare, familiarize yourself with the R3, you can start on this. And then as part of this also in general, it's like change control, do this, in organization, you surely have experts are familiar to do this in a controlled manner and to consider and identify what is actually necessarily, where do you need to adjust, and this all should be, fit for purpose as a whole guideline itself and well considered. And then here's like, again, would be like expected, customized training, if you've been working with ICH and clinical trials for decades, do you need like a whole training on everything? Again, maybe not. So, but then, it's like really, it's like that's, I'm sure people will come to the right core decision on this. And also, has been mentioned, that a gap analysis may be useful, to identify priorities on training needs as, people are busy, as and things are important, and we all want people that they focus on what matters, and not spending maybe unnecessary time on any training events, and then this is here like a hint also to sponsors, when it comes, to how to implement the decentralized or pragmatic trial elements, or how to best incorporate novel tools and technologies. As Annex 2 is still in the draft, but we are very optimistic that this will be finalized and published later this year. So here I'm always saying, stay tuned, on this, and I'm sure, and in accordance with the procedures, there will be more material also coming from ICH on this. And if you're not tired, exhausted, and think, hey, you would like to see more about, here, I'd like to mention, that the expert working group is currently developing a series of training modules, and those are expected to be released later this year. So please stay tuned on this. And here, self-promoting a little bit the work we have done at the EMA with the regulatory networks, the European ones, under the ActEU program. So we had 2 days or 100-day workshop earlier this year where we had like excellent speakers from different stakeholders, and there's a recording live there, presentations, and the report should also be there anytime. So this is, just in case you would like to hear more on this. And with this, I really sincerely thank you for your attention. I hope you found this presentation useful, and looking forward to see you on the 15th for a Q&A session.